I think one of the biggest complaints that people have when they first start reading Lord of the Rings, more than the descriptions, more than what people think is maybe a dull first few chapters, which I think is totally wrong, are the songs in the story. Now, I would know. I am reading Lord of the Rings for the first time in my life, and I'm reading it with 3 other friends who initially shared my annoyances. Why? Why is there a song on every other page in the beginning of the book? Just give me the plot. But the songs tend to peter out as the books go on. And as book 5 hits, it's really just to the meat of the entire story and the characterization. I mean, that's what every good reader really wants, right? Yet I feel like I kind of need an addictions group for this at this point, because the songs, as they are fading, I actually think I'm starting to miss them. But I do want to preface this by saying the songs that annoyed me for maybe the first 5 chapters are not really annoying anymore. I went and revisited them, and I love every single song. And I actually think the Song of Durin might be one of my favorite songs of all time. I think it's incredible. But even so, the frequency with which these songs are diminished is really incredible in the books. Between the 6 books that make up the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, Book 1, has 25 total songs. That's almost 2 songs per chapter. I think that's more. The Fellowship of the Ring, Book 2, has 10 total songs. The Two Towers, Book 3, has 14 total songs. The Two Towers, Book 4, only has 2 songs. The Return of the King, up to which is book 5, up to the point that I am currently at in this book, which is on page 75, around chapter 3, there has only been 1 song. Why am I, someone who is annoyed by Tom Bombadil breaking out into song every other line, actually starting to miss these songs? And I don't think I'm the only person who feels this way. I think when people read this, they weirdly and intuitively feel like they are missing something in the story. And I think the answer is pretty genius as far as J.R.R. Tolkien is concerned, because his writing is just expert. And this didn't really become evident to me until I read this section that Merry is encountering when he's in the mustering of Rohan. Now, in this chapter, Theoden is heading toward the Dwemerberg, and he's gathering all forces around him so he can march to Gondor and go to war. And this chapter is told through Merry's perspective, which is the first time we're in Merry's perspective, who, at the moment, feels like the most insignificant member of the Fellowship. Everyone else is doing something important. I mean, even Pippin was just brought to Minas Tirith and became a guard of the city. But Merry essentially feels like luggage right now. And he longs for home. And in a really beautiful section in the book, it says, Merry looked out in wonder upon this strange country, of which he had heard many tales upon their long road. It was a skyless world, in which his eye, through dim gulfs of shadowy air, saw only ever-mounting slopes, great walls of stone behind great walls, and frowning precipices, wreathed with mist. He sat for a moment half dreaming, listening to the noise of the water, the whisper of the dark trees, the crack of stone, and the vast waiting silence that brooded behind all sound. He loved mountains, or he had loved the thought of them, marching on the edges of stories brought from far away. But now he was borne down by the insupportable weight of Middle-earth. He longed to shut out the immensity in a quiet room by a fire. Now, this feels like the expectations of adventure aren't quite living up to the hype for him, and he just wants to be in his hobbit hole by a fire. That is where Pippin finds peace. But he's riding on a pony with the rest of the men of Rohan on their horses. And the book continues on giving this description, and this is kind of where everything's kind of clicked into place for me with the frequency with which these songs are diminishing in this story and why that's so important. It says, he was very tired, for though they had ridden slowly, they had ridden with very little rest. Hour after hour, for nearly 3 weary days, he had jogged up and down, over passes and through long dales, and across many streams. Sometimes the way was broader where he had ridden at the king's side, not noticing that many of the riders smiled to see the two together. The hobbit on his little shaggy gray pony, and the Lord of Rohan on his great white horse. Then he had talked to Theoden, telling him about his home and the doings of the Shire folk, or listening in turn to tales of the Mark and its mighty men of old. But most of the time, especially on this last day, Merry had ridden by himself, just behind the king, saying nothing and trying to understand the slow, sonorous speech of Rohan that he heard the men behind him using. It was a language in which there seemed to be many words that he knew, though spoken more richly and strongly than in the Shire. Yet he could not piece the words together. At times, some rider would lift up his clear voice in stirring song, and Merry felt his heart leap, though he did not know what it was about. Now, this was the line that had really gotten me thinking about the roles of song in the story, and how I think Tolkien is doing a great job of making Merry feel sad about being so far away from the Shire, but how the further that we get away from the Shire, the less song actually is present in the story. When we were in the Old Forest, only a few miles from the Shire, song filled the pages of these books. The hobbits sang, Aragorn sang, heck, even Frodo saved the whole group of hobbits from the Barrow-wights by singing a song about Tom Bombadil. Song is such a central focus of Tolkien's work because, and I shouldn't know this, but I do because I had a slight spoiler when I was reading through this book, which it's not that much of a spoiler, but Middle-earth was created out of song. Now, this whole channel is essentially just about me reading this book for the first time, or reading the entire Legendarium for the first time, and letting you have the ability to vicariously live through me who is reading it for the first time. And I got this little explanation off of Lord of the Rings fandom, which is, I guess, just like a Lord of the Rings website that gives you summaries on certain things. But it talked about the idea, and I didn't read the majority of this, I read like 2 paragraphs of this, but it talked about the idea that Eru Ilúvatar, who is the god of Middle-earth, created these beings called the Ainur. I believe it's the Ainur. I think this is the first chapter of the Silmarillion, so I'll get there pretty soon. But he created these beings, and he gave them and infused within them the ability to sing. And I think that is essentially how, I think because they were singing collaboratively, I'm assuming that's kind of how the world was created, through this collaborative song of the Ainur. Or maybe Eru Ilúvatar singing these things, and they kind of created the entire realm of Middle-earth. And I think that's really important, because it's like Middle-earth is really just created out of a song. And if that is the case truly, and if Tolkien was influenced by his Catholic faith, which surely he was, then the place where there is the most song is likely to be the Eden of Middle-earth. So I think the Shire is essentially the paradise of this whole story, and everything that the hobbits are doing in this world is to protect the Shire at all cost. Now, this is essentially why Frodo is on this mission in the first place. He is doing it to save the Shire because he loves the Shire so much. And if I were to hazard a guess, it just seems to me like the Shire may have been the first place where Ilúvatar began creating. Total guess, total speculation, but there's a story in Jewish lore where Elohim began creating, and he tossed a grain of sand out into the void. And where that grain of sand landed was Jerusalem, which is what a lot of Jewish people believe is actually Eden. And out of that creation began, or that holy city was birthed. I find that to be eerily similar to this creation account, where the place with the most song is the place where we are closest to the god of Middle-earth. And so Merry sitting here with this longing in his heart for song is actually Merry's longing for home and longing for Eden, for the place where he feels most comfort. Yet I think it's like really important why Merry is feeling a mingling of hope and despair at this moment, because these songs are just echoes into what he longs for at home. And he is lonely for what was and for his friends where he can kind of just share a moment with them and share joy with them. And the next paragraph of the story explains it really well with Merry's whole sadness and loneliness here. All the same, he had been lonely, and never more so than now at the day's end. He wondered where in all this strange world Pippin had got to, and what would become of Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli. Then suddenly, like a cold touch on his heart, he thought of Frodo and Sam. "I am forgetting them," he said to himself reproachfully, "and yet they are more important than all the rest of us. And I came to help them, but now they must be hundreds of miles away, if they are still alive." He shivered. The loneliness of Merry is paramount here because he just wants to be with his friends, and he can't. Everyone is doing their part to save Middle-earth, and Merry feels oddly left out. And don't worry, I'm going to expand on the idea sometime of Merry and everything that he's encountering this chapter, because it was such a good Merry-centric chapter. But that's an essay for another day. So subscribe for that essay, which is probably going to come out later this week. But what I do want to talk about is the idea of the creation myth, and how the fading of songs is essentially the signaling of the loss of freedom, and I think is the exact reason why all these characters are fighting in the first place. Now, in the Shire, the hobbits begin their adventure with joviality, with laughter, with song, a lot of poetry in the beginning of the story. The music is really spontaneous too. Frodo, Sam, and Merry and Pippin, they're kind of singing walking songs, they're singing comics, they're singing rhymes, and even parodies of songs. The Bath song is a personal favorite of mine. I was just about to sing that, but I kind of decided not to. I think most of the songs in the beginning of this tale celebrate simple things in the Shire. They celebrate food, home, beer, and they stitch together this community. And this abundance reflects the Shire's innocence. Life is not yet shadowed by the weight of the world and the weight of evil. So words naturally turn into melody. Song in the Shire and in Hobbiton is a reflex of life. It's a way of making ordinary things beautiful. And as hobbits leave their homeland, songs still appear often, but they begin to shift in tone. They start to sing songs to encourage one another in their walk. But also, they encounter the poetry of the elves and the poetry of the dwarves and the laments of men. Music becomes more solemn, more tied to history and their identity as cultural entities in Middle-earth. And the fellowship bonds through these exchanges, showing that song is not just entertainment, but also tradition. And this section is where one of my favorite songs dwells, the Song of Durin. I think it's the most beautiful thing that Tolkien wrote in The Lord of the Rings so far, and I will die with that on my gravestone. Unless I keep reading and they find a more beautiful song. But as the story approaches Mordor, songs actually grow fewer and fewer. Even when they appear, they're shorter and more fragmented. You only get pieces of songs here and there. Frodo and Sam sing far less than they did when they were in the Shire. And when they do, the songs are tinged with longing or defiance. Except when Sam read that poem about Oliphant, which was great. This kind of shifts the weight of songs from joy to despair. Mordor is a land of silence and oppression, and the closer we get, nature seems to be muted. In such a place, I think the natural human instinct is to sing, which is choked out by exhaustion and fear, as you see in the story. And this declines, and it shows really how evil suppresses freedom, but also it suppresses expression itself. Because if Middle-earth is created and expressed by song, then the lack of song is the lack of creation and expression, which is such a perfect metaphor for this story and the march to Mordor. Songs are abundant where joy and freedom flourish, and they fade where despair and oppression rule. So for Tolkien, music is not incidental. It's the voice of culture. It's the memory of people and the sound of hope. But here, in this part of the story, Tolkien is doing a really great job of crushing our hope. And I'm going to write an essay about this, about how Tolkien does this in this chapter and the first 3 chapters of Return to the King later this week. So subscribe again. And while our hope is being crushed in this story, we don't even get the lyrics of this song or the melody. We just get the words that Merry hears, that he listens to these Rohirrim sing. And he feels a longing in his heart, something he doesn't even understand. And I think that longing is the longing of freedom and expression and a good ale. It's everything that they are fighting for that Mordor is attempting to take away. So when the lack of song starts to pepper the pages of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, I think it starts to make us feel, as readers, a bit displaced. Even though some of us might not really like the songs of Lord of the Rings, there is a cold kind of severity as that happens in the books and continues on as they march toward Mordor. And this is just another example of how Tolkien crafts a story and literally crafts the feeling of the reader and the familiarity and the displacement that you feel by the lack of songs in the beginning, or the lack of songs that as it goes from the beginning, which is packed with songs, to getting further along to Mordor where the songs become significantly less. I don't think at all that he was just bored of writing songs and poems. I think Tolkien probably wanted to include more on every single chapter and page. But the necessity of making the reader feel a bit homesick via the lack of singing is one of the greatest achievements that he's created in this story. because it goes so under the radar. And as these men in Rohan were singing songs that wasn't even described, and as Pippin begins to feel a bit homesick and longs for the Shire, even though he doesn't really know it, so we as readers long for the pure form of living as they live in the Shire, which I think is the purest place in Middle-earth. I think this is something embedded into all of us in creation, and I think it's something that Tolkien was very, very familiar with in his Catholic theology. The idea that we are longing for Eden. We are longing for this place where we can share a meal and a song and not have to go to battle and not have any worries or cares. We are hoping for a paradise. And Pippin had it. And the most beautiful part of all of this is that he sacrificed that temporarily so that he could support the mission to keep that place alive forever. And I made an essay a few weeks or maybe a few months back now about how I actually thought Lothlorien was the Middle-earth, or was the Eden of Middle-earth, but I actually take that back now. Even though they do a lot of singing in Lothlorien, I think the birthplace of song is the Shire. Even though their songs might not be as beautiful as the ones that the elves sing, even though they are not as grand in scope or meaning, I think the simplicity of the songs in the Shire, really the simplicity of the content, being about a bath, or a road, or a good ale, or what life is meant to be, are really the crux of where songs come from. And Pippin's courage to go out and fight against the evil that most in the Shire don't even know is besetting them is a brave and courageous thing to do. And Tolkien's ability to really make me feel homesick just by writing less and less songs as the book goes on is fantastic writing. And it's something I don't really encounter all that much when reading books lately. He made one of the most unpopular parts of his books one of the biggest reasons why we want to end up in Middle-earth and why we want this little place to be saved. I cannot get over the brilliance of this man. So if you want more videos like this, make sure you subscribe. Also, like the video if you made it this far, and become a member for some members-only content and some early access to videos. And remember, as always, to look toward Numenor that was, and beyond to Elvenhome that is, and to that which is beyond Elvenhome and will ever be. I'll see you in the next one.